Welcome to the Living Liberation Movement for Life, Building Sustainable Lives to Build Sustainable Movements Conference. My name is Nikita Mitchell. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm a Black woman, a mother from Oakland, California, and a proud member of the Survivor Justice Movement. Today, I'm joined by some badasses within the survivor, reproductive, and gender justice movement, all of whom have gathered today to reflect on what life and organizing have been like since the fall of Roe versus Wade. On June 24th, 2022, we watched in horror as the Supreme Court overturned Roe versus Wade, which was a law that guaranteed constitutional right to abortion. For some of us, this was a new horror and terror, one that was reminiscent of late night binge-worthy TV shows like Handmaid's Tale. But for many of us, the fall of Roe versus Wade was not surprising, especially those of us who already suffered under state-sanctioned violence based on the intersections of our race, our gender, and our class identities. As Black people, Indigenous people, poor people, and more, we already were impacted by a medical drought that limited our access to safe and affordable abortions. We already lived in a society filled with stigma, which at times overshadowed the decisions that we wanted to make that was best for ourselves. We were already fighting for our lives. We were already fighting for our bodily autonomy. Personally, as a survivor myself, the fall of Roe further exemplified how little control those in power would like for me to have over my body and my choices. It solidified that to get to survivor justice, gender justice, and reproductive justice, we, especially those impacted by patriarchal violence, we need to take our power back right now and forever. All of the panelists who I would love to invite onto the screen with me now, if they're not already here. All of the panelists that we will hear from today are a part, hey y'all, are a part and are leading that fight for bodily autonomy. And I'm so happy that I get to witness and that we get to witness their brilliance and their sharing and their vulnerability today. And so I would love to get us started by welcoming them in and also inviting you all to introduce yourself, all right? So the question, so that we can get to know who y'all are, is what's your name? What's your pronoun? What's your role in movement? And when did you first know that survivors of patriarchal violence could be powerful? When did you first know we could be powerful? Yeah? When did you first feel that? And I would like to pass it to my comrade, Alicia J, to get us started.
I had a feeling you were going to call on me, Nikita. I felt it from afar. Hi, everybody. My name's Alicia J. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a coordinator of a coalition called the Survivors Agenda, along with Nikita Mitchell, who you just heard from. And I am a consultant and coach. I've been focusing in the gender justice space for many years, but I'm more recent to the survivor justice space and have been doing a lot of thinking about the ways in which survivor justice is siloed and shouldn't be. So excited to talk to you more about that today. I first knew that survivors were powerful because I guess when I left an intimate partner violence situation, I actually felt pretty powerful. I felt powerful the whole time. You know, I think it's a misunderstanding that people stay in those relationships because they feel weak, when in reality, I think a lot of people stay because they feel strong enough to bear it. And that was my situation. And then I was reminded, you know, in 2017 with #MeToo, just the scale of how many people have certainly similar situations, each unique in their own way, but just an incredible amount of groundswell that was a further reminder that none of us are alone in those unique stories.
Thank you. for introducing yourself. I'm going to pass it to the next person, and I'd love for us to keep going. Yeah. So, Nikki, can I pass it to you? Introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I am Nikki Coleman. My pronouns are she, her. I am a licensed psychologist. I am a Black woman who is a mother of a Black cis girl. I'm a Black woman from the South. And I don't know a time that I never knew that survivors were powerful. My grandmother was the oldest girl in southern Louisiana of 12, and she was the mother of four children. And she was Ibaye, a survivor of intimate partner violence. And I know how much that shaped my mother and how much that shaped decisions that my mother made for me. So it's been a part of my life for as long as I could remember. Do you want me to select somebody? Do you want to do a little train thing?
Yes, please.
Okay, awesome. So then why don't we hear from Jasmine?
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I am Jasmine Johnson, also known as Jet Setting Jasmine. My pronouns are she, her. My role in the movement, I am a psychotherapist, a dominatrix, sex educator, adult film worker, sex worker, all the things, right? I'm every woman, all that stuff. That's when I realized the power of survivors as I started to claim some of these titles and hold these spaces and these roles that those that have committed violence against me never described me as, never described that as being a possibility. So really defying all of those things for myself, and then putting myself in community and seeing that really the theme of other women like myself and other survivors being able to push forward and attain things that we didn't even know was possible, really find our calling in our pain. So that's what did it for me. Happy to be here. And I will pass it to my comrade, Cinnamon.
I knew you were going to do that. My name is Cinnamon Love. My pronouns are she, her. I am a mother of three young adults, a grandmother of two. I am a survivor of intimate partner violence, a survivor of sexual violence, former child, youth in the sex trades. Also longtime sex worker. I've been a sex worker for 30 years in various different roles and capacities. Currently, I am the executive director of the Black, Indigenous, and People of Color Collective. And I'm also a steering committee member of the National Survivor Network. And when I think I've always, as a child of Roe v. Wade, I mean, I grew up under Roe v. Wade, like I've always felt like survivors were powerful. But within my own little pocket of the movement, the first time I knew that sex workers could be really powerful was within the first month of organizing. We were able to get a cishet white male dominated industry to agree to stop paying white women more money for having sex with Black men, a practice that had been happening for over 50 years and since the industry started. And for me, that, being able to dismantle such a sexist, racist policy and race-based wages let me know that we were really powerful together. So I'm going to pass it to Monet.
Hi, everyone. My name is Monet. I use she, they pronouns. My role in movement is a cultural worker, a writer, a researcher. And then I also sit on the leadership team of the Abolishing Patriarchal Violence Table, which is housed by the Movement for Black Lives, where we hold a survivor fund and safety pods and a bunch of other wonderful things. I first knew the survivors of patriarchal violence could be powerful, I think, from a youth perspective, when I watch myself and I watch some of my friends say no to their caretakers. And so understanding the intersection of being youth and patriarchal violence, and like that first line of refusal is usually the people who are towards the people who are supposed to care for you. And I always like to say, I done told my daddy no, I can tell anybody no. And that's really how I found my power. So I'll pass it back to Nikita.
Yes, I'm just snapping, nodding my head. I hope that y'all are ready. I got my notebook. Hopefully y'all watching got y'all notebook, got y'all pencils, y'all pens, got your ears, your eyes tuned in, because this is about to be fire. So all of us play a different role. We have different entry points into the conversation about reproductive survivor justice and gender justice, right? Often the gender justice, survivor justice, and reproductive justice movements are seen as separate and siloed, right? And I want to name that further in that silo is sex worker rights and anti-trafficking organizing, right? Can you all speak to how you see them as interconnected, if you do? And what's at stake, right? What's at stake if we don't operate from the intersections? What's at stake for us personally, for our communities, for our movements?
I'm happy to jump right into this one. I think when we look at these things, if we just sort of look at what's the thread, like humans, right? Vulnerable humans. So we don't have to look any further than that for, and I mean, of course, it gets more nuanced, but sort of when we think about this, just from a very macro perspective, it's like the interconnectedness that humans can have these experiences from so many different walks of life, presentations, identities, and failing to address our most vulnerable in our population puts us at risk of all human rights. And for those, kind of thinking a little bit to our introduction, when we're thinking about, well, what did it feel like with the overturn of Roe v. Wade? For some people, it felt incredibly devastating because of the direct impact. For others, it felt like a slippery slope. And so I see this as no different. For some people, not addressing the interconnectedness between gender justice, survivor justice, and reproductive justice might feel devastating because you see yourself at the crossroad of all of those. But for others that choose to turn a blind eye, I hope that they wiggle their feet a little to see that it is a slippery slope for all other human rights.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in here also. One of the things that I see happen a lot is that people have a tendency, the anti-trafficking movement in particular has a tendency of not really considering sex workers in this work, or as survivors. The evangelical Christian conservatives who really run the anti-trafficking movement, they simultaneously infantilize sex workers for their choices, and also feel that we don't have the ability to be sexually assaulted because of the exchange of money for services. And so, and yet, when we look at the big, at the statistics, the likelihood that sex workers are included in the survivor population is really great. And often sex workers don't view themselves as, they may not necessarily view themselves as fitting into the legal definition of trafficking, but might relate to domestic violence. And so when we start to view even within trafficking spaces, when we start to view the type of abuses that sex workers might experience, whether it's through labor violations on in legal sectors of the industry, or financial abuse and intimate partner violence type of dynamics, then we start to see this connected thread between the ways in which sex workers are also impacted in and should be included in these movements. When we don't include sex workers in the survivor justice movement, we're really ignoring the fact that there are so many people who may not necessarily, come to the survivor justice organizations or gender justice organizations, but might be, stay within their own population of people. And so it's really important that other movements are doing outreach and communing with sex worker rights organizations so that they're able to reach populations of people who could benefit from the resources that are available in these larger organizations that are much better funded than our movements are.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Monet. Oh, okay. Yes, I love this question. The thread for me is, so the other side of the thread, I guess I should say, right? Like, so I definitely want to agree with Jasmine's comment about just centering humanity. But the reason why that, to me, that becomes so important is because we recognize the thread of cis heteronormative patriarchy is always there, and it does not exist outside of violence and threat. And so to the degree that we are in relationship to that in our other identities, I think sort of influences our level of perceived threat. I think that the reason why we need to think about all of these justice movements in interconnectedness rather than in silos is because when I work with survivors as a therapist, there is something inherent about the use of power through sex that causes shame, and shame makes you turn inward. And so one of the biggest themes that I have to work through over and over and over again with my clients is that this is not anything you invited into your life. This was put upon you because there are bigger systems at play, and you are a survivor of navigating those systems. I think the systems benefit as long as we stay siloed, because we're trying to survive, right? So that piece around getting the day in and day out and understanding who you are as a human and having the right to fully develop in your own sense of self in the context of threat and violence and misattribution of power is work in and of itself. But I think we make it harder when we don't work together as a collective. I think we do far too much individual healing work, and we need to be doing way more collective soul healing work. And for me, that's one of the biggest reasons why I'm so excited to be a part of this conversation, because I think it is shifting our conversation from individual capacity, responsibility, accountability to like, really, what do we do together to be able to shift this experience for everybody?
So, right, but this is getting so juicy. But, and I almost hate to like pause us for a second. You shared a word, cis heteronormative patriarchy, right? And before we continue in answering the question, like, what's at stake if we don't be interconnected, I want to pause and invite Nikki, if you don't mind, some definition sharing, right? What is cis heteronormative patriarchy?
Yeah. Thank you for that. I just want to name, like, I'm so activated doing this. Like, I feel like this is such a really powerful conversation. So I'm like, let's get into it. So when I talk about cis heteronormative patriarchy, right? It's meaning that there is this sort of mainstream understanding of what is normative, what is acceptable, and it tends to center itself around cisgendered masculinity, and that is attached to patriarchal power, and that gets attached to our sexual relationships and our gendered pairings. And so we're all sort of navigating around this very limited, small, but yet somehow powerful orientation around what is normative, acceptable, and that it's used then as the center point for deviation. And the reality is, the gag that kills me about power is it's always the minority that is able to sort of coalesce power in its lack of humanity, and the rest of us sort of get spun out around it. So meaning that there is no basis for there is no factual basis that being cisgendered is the norm. There's factual basis that being heterosexual is the norm. There is no factual basis that patriarchal structures are the norm. And yet those are the threads that we all sort of spend our lives, quite honestly, especially folks on this panel and poor folks and indigenous folks, spend our lives trying to disentangle from, trying to be seen as real, valid, alive individuals. I hope that explained it. I'm gonna be quiet now before I get too high.
On that definition and that shared learning, one of the things that's coming up for me, and I'm gonna go to you, Monet, because I definitely want to hear your take on this. One of the things that's coming up for me is that growing up in a Black young girl's body from a poor family, right, a working class family, there was a way that I thought that sexual violence was the norm, that sexual violence, like that if I did not experience sexual violence, I did not get the keys to Black womanhood. If I didn't get harassed, did I really grow up? Am I really beautiful? Am I really smart if I didn't get harassed or stopped in the street, right? And so there's a way in which sexual violence becomes a part of young Black girls' growing up story that really is just coming up for me. Is our rites of passage, right? Or it's perceived to be our rites of passage. And so that's that, as you were speaking, I'm like, oh, how does that, for folks are like, well, why does it matter? Cis heteronormative patriarchy, right? Why does it matter? The theme that's coming up for me is there's a way in which it shapes our understanding of our deservingness, right? For folks who don't sit in the center. Yeah. So thank you for layering that on. Monet, want to pass it to you. Any thoughts that you have around sort of why we need to see these as connected movements?
Yeah, I think another movement that for my work is related to this conversation is the question of abolition. And I think that folks have done a lot of good work around getting our organizers or community members to understand prisons and their relationships to gender justice, sexual justice, and repo justice. But I don't think that we've done enough work to understand the hospital and the doctor's office in that same regard. And so in my work and the research that I'm doing, and as an abortion doula, I'm always thinking about, like, when we're talking about someone getting an IUD, we're also talking about someone most likely trying to navigate interpartner violence and trying to control their reproductive experience in order to lessen violence, right? Those things are always connected for the clients that I'm working with. When we're talking about like forced cervical exams, we're also talking about sexual violence that is sanctioned by doctors, right? When we're talking about what it means for a young person who might be a sex worker trying to just pay their rent, just going to the doctor and revealing that information, and now you're dealing with mandatory reporting. We're talking about gender justice and survivor violence and all of those things, and they're all located in this hub of public health within doctors. And I really want people to start seeing doctors in similar regards that they see the state, because they have an allegiance to the state. And so that for me is one of the biggest ways that repo is connected to all of these things, and why we should care. And I also just think that when we get into funding wars, why are we allowing funders to see us as separate when we know that we are all the same community, especially as it pertains to Black folks, right? Like this categorization that funders need, that philanthropy needs, doesn't exist for us because our struggles are interconnected. The way we come to health is oftentimes through violence. The way we come into work is oftentimes through all of these connecting things. So I think that this question for me is an indictment on philanthropy more than anything else.
Ooh, come on. I would love to sort of land us in this question with Alicia, sharing your thoughts on why we need to be interconnected.
Yeah, I mean, picking up where Monet left off, in terms of what's at stake if we don't operate at the intersections, it's what we have now, right? It is movements that are divided, disconnected, underfunded, not respected enough for the power that we bring to the table, constantly playing defense, sort of barely with an offense. It's like literally where we are right now is what's at stake. And I also don't want to pretend that when we talk about movements, when we talk about reproductive justice, survivor justice, sex worker advocacy, that those things are on equal playing field, right? Because if you look at where money moves to quote unquote, women's issues, which we can dissect that later, most money moves towards breast cancer research. After that, it's reproductive rights and health, right? Rights and health, not reproductive justice, rights and health. And then like 20 more things. And then it's survivor justice, right? Like we are not comparing apples to apples in terms of resources, in terms of organizing infrastructure, in terms of electoral power, in terms of who dictates the national narrative. So what's at stake is what you have now, which is completely misaligned and mismatched infrastructure within movements that don't actually reflect the needs of the people that we're serving.
And that, and Alicia, one of the things that's coming up for me as you were speaking, as other folks are speaking, is that our opposition actually is not as disconnected as our movements are, right? And so there is a way in which when things like the fall of Roe happens, we don't have the relationships, the connections, the experience with shared resources and shared action, both in movements and in our communities, to take action in the way that we need to on time, right? With the power that we need. There's a way in which our movement infrastructure, and I think folks were speaking to this earlier, as it's intentional, right? To ensure that we can't take back all of our power, right? Or assert all of our power. But a part of this is that we don't have the infrastructure that we need to actually show up for each other when we need to, right? And I'm going to just call this out. Cinnamon didn't name this, but that's been one of the greatest lessons around sex worker rights for me, right? Is that there's a lot of things that that you have taught me, and organizations like SWAP USA have taught me around issues that sex worker rights and anti-trafficking folks are experiencing, that are so siloed that we can't even show up when we need to show up, right? And so just naming that and claiming that out loud as one of the things that are at stake.
I wanted to jump in also, if I can, before we go on to the next question. Something that Monet mentioned around abolition, I think it's really important for people to understand and acknowledge that the opposition really does, they are taking the language and co-opting the language of abolition and also of Black feminist theory, to claim that what they're doing is, they are looking to abolish the sex trades. They're looking to abolish abortion. Like they are literally trying to take language that actually means something, right? When, as a descendant of abolitionists, a very famous abolitionist, it's like, these words mean something. And so when they take this language, they're taking this language for themselves to be able to to dictate what is happening within movement spaces, right? It's not enough for them to want to end trafficking, they're and even then it's like they're not looking at the intersection of labor trafficking and sex trafficking. They just want to get rid of sex work. They want to take they want to conflate sex work and trafficking in order to be able to get rid of the entire industry, directly causing harm to the most vulnerable people who are doing this work and erasing bodily autonomy. I mean, we saw when the leaked draft of the Roe decision was, came out, sex work and drug use were both included in that conversation, but people really were not thinking that these are things that could come down the line. Like they weren't thinking, people started talking about how the loving decision might be next, right? It's in terms of interracial marriages, or how, same-sex marriage could also be a target of the Roe decision. And, these questions of bodily autonomy, and it crosses gender lines, it crosses race, it crosses the lines of poverty. And we have to think about, and like you said, Nikita, the opposition, they're thinking about all of this. Like, they're thinking about, how can we get rid of, X, Y, and Z, and where do we need to start in order to get there, right? It's like, sex workers are always the canary in the coal mine, because it's so easy for the opposition to sell this idea of sex workers as needing to be saved. These conversations around getting rid of trans rights, by talking about the children, we need to save the children. And, it's the same thing with sex workers. We need to save the children. And so it's, the opposition uses this language that people are usually only briefly familiar with, right? People have an idea of what it means, but don't really have a full understanding of the context and nuance or the history of this language, so that they're able to, lump all of these things that they want to get rid of into one nice little neat little ball, and then they run with it. I mean, they get so much funding in the anti-trafficking movement, just to target sex workers who are consensually, participating in labor. We're watching this happen right now. There's a new bill that was just introduced in Los Angeles, where they're looking to actively go after sex trafficking in the Figueroa corridor, which is essentially the Stroll in South Central LA, which is populated by Black women, primarily Black cis and trans women. And we know from our history tells us that what they're really going to be doing is doing sting operations to arrest, sex workers on the street, not to actually arrest traffickers. And so, there's these nuanced conversations are really not as nuanced as we think they are, because ultimately it's really all about puritanical, Christian conservatives trying to dictate what we do with our bodies. And it's really important that we start to see it that way, and we stop like creating the discord amongst ourselves, so that we can like bring all of us in to make sure that we're able to protect ourselves the same way that they are looking to attack us.
Thank you for layering that on, Cinnamon, and also planting the seeds towards the next question, right? Which is that all of you have spoken to why it is important for other movements to center survivor, gender, and reproductive justice, and what's at stake. I want us to take a second to put some family business out there, just real quick, right? Let's just put it on out there. What gets in the way? If we know it's important, if we know some stuff is at stake, right? What gets in the way of movements centering gender, survivor, and reproductive justice in their work? What gets in the way in our communities, for that matter, right? Centering the experiences of survivors in our communities and in our family. What's getting in the way? Can we do that? Can we put some family business out there real quick?
I think we can.
Okay,
We're family, right?
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay. Well, we're in a safe space, so let's work it out here. Okay. If it comes out messy, we'll tie it up neatly. I think, Nikki, when you shared about that shame turn inwards, we like in this panel of beautiful folks, we're all like survivor, 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 right? Just our stats here. And then we brought it out a little bit more. There are so many people that have experienced this, gender violence, sexual violence, interpersonal violence, violence. It is woven in and out of our culture. There's no resources or adequate resources to support our healing, to name it, right? To be able to shift the blame where it belongs, to, all of the things that we're fighting for. So we're a bunch of folks that are fighting for things that we need, So it becomes incredibly difficult to have somebody work through that personal shame and somehow hold that space and create policies in the professional space and to advocate for things that they are having difficulty navigating for themselves or within their family system or within their community or so I think that I don't know, I guess in this conversation my role is to do the micro macro thing, is that when we sort of look at what's getting in the way, it's like the cause and the cure, right? We don't have the resources that we need to help people be well, to stop perpetuating violence. And I think if we can, at the lowest level as practitioners, in anything, in any system, I think Monet is saying that whether you're in the medical system, whatever system you belong, the barista system, whatever, the National Honor Society, if you're you have to be able to see how this violence is deterring you from whatever the goal is, the Key Club, whatever club you belong to, your book club, how is what we're talking about deterring you from pleasure and enjoying that goal, from autonomy and how you practice in that space, from you actually meeting your intended or stated goal? And oftentimes it's at the very personal level. Have you done some of the interpersonal work that you need to do to be able to advocate in these spaces, work with others that you may not share all of the same beliefs? That's one thing that the opposition doesn't allow get in the way. They say, Black folks over here, y'all believe in Jesus Christ. White folks over here, y'all believe in Jesus Christ. Okay, then we believe in this topic together. Forget where we don't agree. This we can center. And so I think that what we're all saying to that last question is that if we can center our most vulnerable folks in our work across the aisles, across organizations and what have you, then and actually center survivors in the work that we're doing, we will start to see some of our common, the other areas or I don't want to say the smaller, the other issues that we may or may not share. And it's like, I hate to see it happen, but you see it's so seamless the way the opposition does it. It's like, yeah, all that other stuff that we're fighting for, but babies, oh yeah, all that other thing, but these women, what they're doing with their bodies, like they can somehow agree on that. They can put aside all those differences and create policy and raise funds and streamline resources. And I think that I know that we could learn from that because we literally have a model in front of us.
Oh, go ahead. So you want to go?
No, go ahead. I'll go ahead.
A part of me wants to get so messy with this question, but I just I think that, a part of what gets in the way is like who we have leading what. I think that we have a leadership crisis happening in our movement right now. And I think that we have people who have been in roles for decades, and those roles have solidified their material lives, and they have no intention of upending that. And they are where they are, and they are uninterested in where we want them to be, and they are not movable. And I think that is a problem. I also think that a lot of our movements on this side, unlike other movements, are largely regulated and held by nonprofit organizations. So we're already dealing with those kind of state-based limitations that control who we can work with, what we can speak on, when we can collaborate, and towards what. I keep going back to philanthropy because as someone trying to establish a permanent survivor fund that is just supposed to just give direct money to survivors, no questions asked, you apply, here's $2,500, go do what you need to do. And the difficulty of just doing that, right, has really shown me why some of this work is so hard. I could get $1 million tomorrow from donors to hold a convening where survivors just come for a day and talk. But if I go to those same donors and ask them to just give to this fund, everybody suddenly just doesn't understand why that's critical, right? And so I think a lot of like where we are concentrated in is taking up a lot of our time. We can't fight harm doers and fight our movement leaders at the same time. It can't happen simultaneously. We're only one individual, right? So I think that that's a part of it. And then I also just think that how we treat each other, just in general, can sometimes get into the way. I think a lot of times I see like a lot of projection that happens between survivor organizers and repo justice folks, where it's like all that pain, all that grief, all that mourning, it gets turned on us. And somehow you're leaving spaces cussing each other out. And now we don't even want to work together no more for the fight. We didn't even get to cussing the people at the top out, right? So I think a part of that is the way it's like you can't hold the trauma of your individual experience in your body and then also on top of that turn it into a political fight and then hold that trauma and then still be broke on top of that because you don't make enough money for none of this shit. And so it just doesn't work that way. When the most vulnerable and most impacted people all got to show up to the same retreats, it falls apart if it's just us.
Thank you for layering that on. And before, again, I'm like, it's so juicy and I don't want to pause us at any point, but this is a conference where folks who are watching it, folks who are commenting, folks who are engaging are here because they are leaders, right? And want to be clear, that's not, I have a particular title in an organization and that deems me a leader, but I am committed to the work of justice, the work of freedom in whatever capacity, right? So I want to pause as y'all are talking, because what's coming up for me is what type of leader do I need to be, right? So taking it from movement organization as if that's somehow outside of individuals. And then it's not, right? So who am I? Who do I need to be? What values do I need to hold? How do I need to take care of myself, sustain myself, navigate the shame and guilt and story that gets triggered so that I can be a part of curating movements that can hold the multiplicity of our experiences? Right? So I want to just hold that as a question for folks who are watching, for ourselves to be inside of. Who do I need to be to make sure, how do I need to take care of myself, my story, so that we actually don't lose what we don't actually need to lose, right? So just want to hold that question for folks watching. Cinnamon, want to pass it to you.
Yes, I'm so glad that you posed that question because it kind of lends to what I was, what I've been thinking about, or what I was thinking about as everyone was speaking. It's so important that we interrogate our own biases and our own needs and the things that we would have wanted when we were in the position of being a survivor, and the messages that we received about what a survivor looks like, sounds like, the types of behaviors that survivors participate in. I remember, hearing, decades ago that, survivors of sexual violence usually tend to either become frigid or they become hyper promiscuous, and never was there any kind of gray in between. But it was, it was often like a justification, even within even before I got involved in the sex workers' rights movement, people would often ask, like, are you a survivor? Have you experienced sexual assault? Did you experience childhood sexual assault? As if that was the reason as to why I became a sex worker, not systemic oppression, not poverty, not divorce with young children, but it was the sexual assault that I must have experienced that led to my becoming, a whore, a sex worker, right? And so I think that it's important that we, interrogate the idea that there are no perfect victims, right? There are no perfect survivors, and even the language that we use, like, you know, and I use the word victim, you know, because I've heard so many people use that term. I was on a call with a client recently, calling a anti-trafficking org, trying to get this person case management. And the person on the other line doing intake asked them if they were a victim, not if they were a survivor, not, you know, like placing all of that responsibility of what happened to them on them. And it's like, and I think that it's important that we, you know, that we interrogate these things for ourselves, so that when we are working with other people, when we are leading our individual organizations or leading movements, that we take a step back and say, okay, how can I center this person who is sitting in front of me and what they think that they need, and not what I think that they need, in order to get them the help and the resources that they they want, right? You know, because sometimes, and you know, for me, sometimes those resources may not necessarily be the traditional case management and all of those things. It might be making sure that their cat gets spayed and neutered. It might mean making sure that their cat, that they get medical paperwork, you know, that they get paperwork saying that their dog is a what is the term I'm thinking of? I know. Thank you. That their dog is an emotional support animal, so that they don't lose the one piece of comfort that they have in the midst of them managing other life circumstances and their trauma. It's like, you know, centering the person and their particular circumstances, and not centering our own trauma, not centering our own, you know, our own ideas of what we needed, is, for me, is the best way to go about making sure that we become the leader that we want to be, and being able to move our clients and the movement forward.
Is there time for me? Okay, awesome. I think about this question so much. The more that I learn about trauma and its impact on our body and our brains, the more I understand how much trauma we are all just navigating day in and day out. And so I think, for me, the like fundamental answer to that question, the original question, is we're all trying to survive trauma while living in a current context in which we are being constantly onslaught by increasing trauma. And one of the things that I think, one of the myths that I hear when I'm working with my clients and in broader conversations, that I think is intentional, is that whatever you have survived is only an influence on that one part of yourself or that one part of your life. And the reality is, we know that trauma shapes the brain, period, full stop. And therefore, it then shapes your ability to think clearly, to think with strategy, to be able to perceive interpersonal interactions, to be in your body, to have a sense of your own embodiment, so you know what's safe and not safe, so you can advocate for yourself or not, how to do that in a way that allows you to still have interpersonal connection, how to know when you need to take time out to recover, to take care of yourself, to come back into your body. And I think there's a lot of people in movements and a lot of people in leadership roles in movements who are so outside of their bodies. They are living and enacting their trauma all day, every day. It has become their norm, and they have lost sight of there being a different way of engaging. And I think this sense around economic justice, this sense around economic stability, having comfortable homes, having comfortable lifestyles, being able to go to the grocery store and put whatever you want to on that cart and not have to think you got to put some stuff back. There's a level of comfort that comes along with achieving financial status, some level of stability, some level of prestige, whatever you want to call it, that causes, that gives a sense of calm, a balm to trauma survival. And that's a hard thing to ask somebody to give up, right? And I think we need to be having much more open, transparent, vulnerable conversations about how our trauma is showing up in all the ways and in all the places. Much to where we started with Jasmine, like when I do a consultation call for a client now, my language is to like first start normalizing that your experience is unique to you, but it is way more common than we like to live in the delusion that it is not, right? That there are way more survivors than there are not, and that's a big problem. And it is in everything that we do. And then to Monet's point, it's really always been crazy to me that the philanthropy world is made up of the people that are causing the harm. So we go to them to give us the money to fix the thing that they are creating for us. It's such a toxic, incestuous relationship. Of course, they don't want to give money to actual change that brings power to people, because when they do that, they lose the power they have to have the money to stay in power. It's this really messy cycle that we are in.
Ooh. When the invitation was to bring family business out, y'all said, bet that, let's do that. Want to just name two things that are coming up for me, like honesty, like bring my own business out here, right? Because again, movements, organizations are not outside of humans. They're not outside of me either, right? Or us on this call. And two of the things that's coming up for me is how I joined movement with an understanding of my identities as like a Black person, as a poor person, as a student, right? And learned how to build campaigns, learned how to use my voice, learned how to, build coalitions and take down and build up. But when it came to my survivorship, I was quiet, right? When it came to any topic about gender justice, reproductive justice, sexual violence, that was deeply locked off, right, from within me. And so there's a way in which I couldn't have been a good leader if I didn't address this portion of my story, right? And that doesn't mean address it out loud with other people, right? Claiming it online, talking about it. But there was something about, do I really feel powerful if I am hiding from within myself a portion of my life, right? Something that has deeply shaped and trained me, right? Am I really truly feeling powerful? And how, when I don't feel powerful in those ways, I attempt to gain power in other ways within the organizations that I'm a part of to validate or soothe the places where I don't feel powerful. And so as you were sharing, Nikki, I'm like, oh, how have I shown up as a bad leader, right? And I'm naming it and claiming it. Where have I shown up not on my axis, not grounded, right? Because I was seeking power from this to soothe someplace inside of me, yeah? And then the second thing that came to mind as folks were talking about philanthropy, and I'm happy we're talking about philanthropy, right? We're talking about money, we're talking about dollars. One of the things that's coming up for me is that we know that, at least in the survivor justice movement, sexual violence, it deeply impacts Black people, Indigenous people, but it is not only impacting Black people, Indigenous people. So that means that when engaging with funders, most likely they are also survivors or no survivors. And I've seen many of times the folks are like, we don't talk about that because this money, this family money, this comes from an abuser, right? My abuser, we don't talk about that, right? Or I don't actually have the space for this conversation. That's scary. It's too personal. And I'd rather give money to things where I don't have to, where I'm not centered in it, where justice don't include me. That's much easier to be a savior than to be an impacted person, right? And so just thinking about how philanthropy shows up in a conversation is about something that they're also impacted by, right? Overwhelmingly, or know someone that they do. Alicia, want to see if you have anything you want to layer on, because we got some more questions, yeah, to go deeper with.
I mean, listen, I really appreciate how we're just telling the truth. So, yeah, I mean, if we're going to talk about philanthropy and where the money comes from and the fact that we don't control where our own money comes from for our work, I think it's also important, and this might be a very unpopular opinion, but I think it's important that we acknowledge that we have also not done our work to make the case. I think that we go to people that we know don't fundamentally believe in our humanity and our control of our bodies. And we expect that if we say, well, you should care because it's the right thing to do, that will change anything. And so I'm not saying that we need to compromise our values, but I think that we need to be more strategic than we have been historically about what it means to meet people on somebody else's playing field and bring them over to our side. So what does it mean to actually make the case around political power? Survivors as a movement, as a community, as a group of people do not have political power that is unified under one message, under one voting bloc, under one policy platform. And that's our work to do, right? And then it's our work to say, and actually, here's why you should care, because it benefits what you're trying to do, right? You're trying to put Democrats in power. Actually, we can help you do that. And now that's not saying that we compromise the fact that we believe in the Democratic Party or even a two-party system, but it is to say that if we are going to say that we are not going to self-fund our own movements, which for the most part, we have already decided that we are not self-funding our own movements, which we can talk about later because I think that should change, then we also need to admit that we are not properly making the case to the people that are currently holding the reins. And I think my cat heard Cinnamon talk about emotional support animals, and now she's joined the call.
Mm-hmm. Well, welcome, Kat. My two dogs have been doing a whole dance back on the side of me. It's a conversation for all of us. I would love for us to move into talking more specifically about Roe versus Wade, right? So this panel is about what has happened since. I want to invite y'all to think back to when you learned that Roe versus Wade was overturned, right? So just scaling back to that time in our brains. What did the fall of Roe mean for you personally and for your community, right? What did it mean for you?
We kind of got a round robin thing going, so I'm gonna just go with it. So personally, it made me sort of look at like, well, okay, how you out here acting? Because your consequences are different now, right? It did. I was just like, okay, where are you taking risks and chances that you can't play around with anymore? And to realize honestly that the messaging about like who gets an abortion and all that sort of stereotyping and stigma and all of that shit, like how that still was a part of like when this thing was going away, I was like, wait a minute, am I too X or too this, really just like thinking about my behavior in relationship to the Supreme Court's overturning this decision. So that was one. The second thing is my children. And thinking about it from gender, reproduction, all of these things. Like I have a 23-year-old that was approaching marriage. What does this look like for her in family planning? Where do they go for resources for family planning, whether they choose to have children or not? And to me, family planning is a pleasure. We live in a pleasure-centered family. It's not only is right, but it's a part of their pleasure. How are they going to go into their life as newlyweds with not just abortion, but everything that went along with this, especially as Black women and our issues related to reproductive rights and medicine? All of those things were coming up. I have a 19-year-old that's up at college. And the interesting thing with that was, okay, what are her behaviors? Okay, she's not messing around with men like that, but what are the percentages for women that are assaulted at college age on campus? What is this? How are we going to get to Tallahassee? And then from Tallahassee, what state can we go to if we need to support her? Those are kind of things. Oh, you have a 5-year-old son. What kind of conversations do we need to be having about? Because before it was, we were always going to, how do you support your partner through this? Now supporting your partner means something totally different. And then we have a 1-year-old. So on June 24th, she was just a month and 14 days. I was like, oh shit, we done brought another little girl into this world. Why do we do that? We should have waited until this, and then really thinking about how are we going to wait to experience the pleasures and the trajectory of our life, always hanging on these policies made by people who don't give a damn about us. And then making a decision like we have to press forward from here, which includes like, okay, tack on this fight to what we was already fighting, but we have to push forward because these kids are here. We have to protect them, and we still deserve pleasure in our life. So that's what was going on for me on like June 25th, and I was probably texting Cinnamon the whole time, like, what the fuck? How are we going to serve our clients? But that's professional.
Thank you for naming. Anyone else want to add to that? What were you thinking about? What was the impact?
Yeah, I'll jump in. When the Roe decision came down, for myself personally, I've been in menopause for 11 years. So I wasn't outside of my daughters and thinking about their experiences. I was really more thinking about the community and what was next. There were already people that, who I knew within the sex working in a abortion justice. And so, just trying to think of, who do I know that's already in this work? How can we connect people to the people within the community who are specifically raising money for sex workers to be able to access abortions, or to be able to go to others, whether it's going to another state or getting an abortion in their state if it was still legal. Excuse me. Excuse me. One second. But it was, but definitely for me, like that was the thing that was most important to me, was figuring out who were the resources, right? Who were the resources? Jasmine and I had a conversation about, what does this mean? Do we need to start earmarking funds specifically for people who are trying to access abortions? And, when you already, and we talked about this a little earlier around philanthropy and not being well funded, it's like, we don't have the money to earmark specifically for people looking to get an abortion. But who do we know that does? Like, who do we know that's already doing the work, and how can we coalition with them? Because, and I started to see, people who were choosing elective hysterectomies because they were, done with, they were already single parents, were already, having, already trying to figure out, like, and living in states that had become battlegrounds, and had rescinded abortion. But also having difficulty accessing elective hysterectomies or elective tubal ligations because of the fact that, again, this is one of the many ways that our, white supremacist, cis heteronormative society wants to control women's bodies, is by telling us that we should or shouldn't be able to choose not to have children. And also seeing people really educating others around the use of these like period trackers in states that had become that had rescinded Roe v. Wade. And so, like, for me, it was really a matter of just gathering as much information as I possibly could, gathering the resources. So when people did come to us looking for resources, we knew where to send them, because we have been trying to really focus our work on, very particular needs, and mental health and medical care are some of the needs that moving forward we're still trying to center, but knowing that we don't have enough money, it was like, how can we, who can we connect people with so that if they need the resource, they have the resource. Yeah, I'll pass it on to someone else.
I think Alicia, you were gonna say something.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, the fall of Roe, it's like we knew it was coming, and then it did. And as predicted, it set the agenda for how we're now going to be spending the next year, 2 years, 10 years, like clawing our way back. It's of note that we're having this conversation the day after Election Day. It's of even more note that we won in a couple of really key places, Virginia, Ohio, that when you put abortion on the ballot, it wins, even in Republican districts and Republican counties. It's of note that folks are turning out to vote for abortion, even when they couldn't care less about the candidates who are up and down the ticket. And so, it's in some ways, I think this is an opportunity of unification, of really demonstrating that the public will is behind us, that even some of the Republican women and white men that are normally, not with us, some of them might be with us on this issue, and that is actually a door to open there. And it's also a reminder that the longer that we continue to be in a position of playing defense, somebody else is always going to be setting the agenda for us of how we have to spend our time.
I think my thoughts were my feelings and thoughts were very similar to Jasmine in that I'm a woman of a certain age, so I was like, okay, hormonal birth control is not really the best for me physiologically, but I'm still out in these streets, and I gotta really rethink how I'm gonna be in these streets. I live in Texas, so I'd already sort of been on the front end of like worrying about that, but then your world starts to get smaller. It also brought to mind to me thoughts about just how much economic capacity shifts your privilege status, right? And like, I have economic capacity to be able to get me to a place should I need to, but how much that was not true for so many other people. But I'm also a full-time single parent, and just knowing like how much of a challenge it is being a full-time single parent. And then I started to think very specifically around how does this shift my conversation with my daughter around pleasure and her sexual development and the conversations that we're already having, and how do I inform her about like her new world that she's growing in with this reality, but also like how do I continue to create a sense of like activism in her as well? Like, how do you have a conversation? She was 11 then. Like, how do I have a conversation when she's not really even in that space of puberty, but we have open conversations about sex already, and just like being pissed, just straight up pissed that I have to spend so much mental energy even like thinking about some of this stuff because someone else has decided that my body does not belong to me. And then also just having this like joy of, I'm so grateful for women. I know that there are women who have been doing this work, that have been on the front end of this work, that there's going to be like movement already happening, and that we will figure it out because we are survivors. So I had like the mix of all of those thoughts and feelings.
I love this question. I don't even know how to like begin to answer it, but makes me think back to my time as a policy fellow at the Black Women's Health Imperative. And before the fall of Roe, I think a lot of us in RJ, like one of the biggest things we were trying to do was get the Hyde Amendment removed. For those of you who may not know, the Hyde Amendment basically prevents federal dollars from going to abortion. So if you're on Medicare or anything like that, you can't have your abortion paid for by the state. And I thought about how Roe was not this like big universal agreement that we have the right to abortion. Roe was a privacy decision. And I thought about how repo health or repo rights has left Black women behind so many times. And I thought about how Black women are almost always the group that people are willing to concede grounds on, and what we are naming as critical to the fight for reproductive rights and justice is always put on the back burner. And so a lot of the times I like to tell people, like, yes, the right to an abortion, abortion on demand, whenever you want it, pregnant person gets the final say. I'm in alignment with that, of course. But what happens when we're not thinking about like the aborting wanted pregnancies because of your economic position as a Black woman, or because of the nature of your interpersonal relationships as a Black woman, right? Like I think about how political motherhood is for Black women and how the state has so much say over when we can be mothers, when we can't be mothers, how we mother, and what our mothering experience will be. And so I thought when Roe fell that it's going to set back a really vital conversation between us as Black women, because now we all need to be on the front lines for abortion, 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 abortion. And even though there are more pillars to reproductive justice, right? Our foremothers gave us more pillars. Right now, folks are coming to the polls for abortion, and it's up there. But we know as Black women, our experiences are far more profound than that. And so like, that was one of the biggest things I was feeling. It's like, so when do we get to show up with our message, right? When do we get to show up with our concerns? Because when I go back and I'm talking to young Black women, 18 to 23, they're not really that concerned with the abortion, right? They're really concerned with, how do I get the 2-bedroom apartment when I want my baby? They're really concerned with I don't qualify for WIC, but I cannot afford food. Like they're really concerned with that is what they're talking about, what they're experiencing. And there's really no room for that if we're only showing up for abortion. And I think there's very little to be said about all of the people on the Democratic side who made the fall of Roe possible because they were willing to concede on Black women's primary goal. So thinking about the election of Obama, who got in office and was like, not a priority. Thinking about all the congressional representatives whose offices I sat in, talking about the Hyde Amendment, knowing Republicans were stacking the courts for Roe to fall, and then being like, I don't really want to upset my constituents. This just isn't a priority, right? Verbatim said that, bar for bar. Not me just explaining it, bar for bar. And so I just think about like how Black women become a political priority only when it's time to serve other people's bodies. That was a big warning point for me. And yeah, also I always think about like Black girls and like, what is this going to mean for them when this is the political moment in which they are growing up in? And what does it mean to just be a Black girl when Roe falls? And how you're coming into Black girlhood, Black womanhood, Black teenagehood through the loss of political autonomy that you barely had to begin with. And I think people are really not paying attention to what this means for their experiences around sex, violence, reproductive health, coercion, and all of those things.
Ooh, I'm like taking it in, absorbing it, and want to give us a chance to do that. Yeah. One of the things that I would add is when Roe versus Wade fell, I was a part of organizations, Black liberation organizations, survivor justice organizations that were doing this weird thing where they were saying, how do we show up for this issue as if it's not a Black liberation issue or survivor justice issue? How do we show up for the organizations that do that work as if we don't hold within the very four walls of our organizations people who live at the intersections and who are impacted by the fall of Roe versus Wade? What became very apparent is the ways in which territorial politics in our organizations and our movements has created so deep of silos that we can't activate when we need to activate to save our people, right? And whether that be sort of the ways in which white-led organizations take up a lot of space, or the ways in which we have Black leadership who are like, you have to follow what we are doing in order for it to be valid, as if I didn't have an abortion at 14. And so it's interesting to see in moments of crises how our shit that we didn't handle, that family business that we don't handle, that trauma that we don't handle, how that shit, I don't even know if we can cuss, but I'm gonna go continue doing what I'm doing anyways, right? How that shit shows up in moments of crisis, right? And stops us from being able to work in partnership when we need to. And that was things, I was like, wait, do I get to do anything about the fall of Roe? Do I get to own that I had an abortion, more than one, and that I like to be out in these streets, and the ways that I like to be out in these streets? I like to play games, play with fire. Do I get to name and claim that I'm a part of that movement, right? Do I have to get validity from someone to name and claim that I'm a part of the movement to protect abortion rights? So it's interesting how that sort of showed up and shaped how people activated with each other. Yeah. So that's something that was coming up for me at that time. I just learned, everyone watching, we just learned that we got a little less than 10 minutes left. But we gonna keep going and pretend like we got more time than that. So this is what I would love to do. Yeah. I would love to ask a question around our last question before we do closing thoughts. I don't want to choose, but let's go on and choose. All right. So again, this is a conference for folks who are leaders, right? Or who want to be leaders, or on the journey to leadership, just a journey of believing that they're leaders, right? Inherently that we have that, right? And so the question is for us and for y'all. Survivor justice and reproductive justice is not just a political framework, right? It's not just what we are fighting for, right? Survivor justice and reproductive justice articulates values and behaviors that we need to hold to get free and to keep us free. Can you speak to what we as liberatory leaders need to commit to get to a free world, right? What do we need to commit to? What values, what behaviors do we need to commit to? Yeah.
I'll
No, please
I was
shake
like,
it up, Nikki.
are we gonna do it? Are we gonna do the thing? This is from the position that obviously I occupy the space in, and that I think just do your healing work. Like I feel like that even language has been so co-opted by mainstream folks and like social media, and it's like getting your nails done in a bath, and like, no, the real healing work is hard and heavy and deep, and it looks ugly, but it's so necessary. I oftentimes think about our as Black folks, our ancestors, and the liberation practices that they had to engage in as being different than ours. And I think the work that they had to do was much more external than it was internal. And now it is really up to us to be able to do our internal repair work. We have intergenerational trauma that we have to heal. We have our own interpersonal violence trauma that we have to survive and heal. We have familial trauma. Like, to really do that work and recognize it is non-linear, that it is lifelong, that although I am a big fan of talk therapy because I'm a therapist, there are multiple ways that we need to be engaging in it. And that part of that has to include a sense of, and not even a sense, but a practice of pleasure and joy as radical acts of reclaiming our right to be fully human, and being able to be fully connected to ourselves as like spiritual beings having a human experience, right? And like recognize that sometimes we do get tired and weary, and like that's okay. Sometimes we encounter experiences that feel bigger than our capacity to handle them in the moment, even if we've survived mountains of shit, and that's okay too. So I think for me, like that becomes really, really fundamental and critical.
Shared sentiments of my fellow psychotherapists. Just a reminder that the movement is made up of survivors, right? So building in like we are our peers are our clientele base, you know. And so building in this grace that we talk about, actually build in what are we going to be graceful? Are we offering grace? So operationalize it like we operationalize the strategic plan and all that stuff, right? And then just looking out for just the reality that, as I mentioned before, people hurt people. So just look at how you might be hurting folks, totally unintentional. How are you perpetuating violence on others or even yourself? You're doing all this work out there and then you go home and you beat yourself up, right? So, and then use your own resources, right? If this is something that we had to learn, is that as survivors that are doing this work, we might need a taste of our own medicine before we start dealing it out. So use some of these resources in-house to see how they feel, how they benefit, how they work, and then be able to be seriously a steward of what you're, of the talk that you're talking.
Thank you. They telling us the warning. I know. And so I'm actually going to pause us. I know. I want to keep going. But I want to pause us, and because I want folks to know where they can find you if you want to be found, right? If you want to be found online, where can people find you? Where can y'all keep the conversation going? And if they can't find you nowhere, be like, it's all good. See you in the streets. Yeah. Monet, can I pass it to you to get us started on where people can find you for more conversation?
Yeah, I put my Instagram handle on here. It's Black Reading to Heal on Instagram, and you can find me there.
Everybody else, y'all like, no, we good out in the streets, or is this where folks can find you?
So you can find me at singleinbrooklyn.com, and the links to all the places, social media and otherwise, to find me are there.
I can be found at jetsettingjasmine.com, and also going to be all up in Monet's comments because and so I have to be amongst all of these brilliant folks here and can't wait to connect. So you'll find me wherever these folks are.
You can find me at Dr. Nikki Knows, DrNikkikIKNOWS. That's my website. That's my IG. And I'm happy to be found. I'm happy to connect. I'm definitely going to be following all of you all as well. So I continue to learn from all of the brilliance here today. It's been a joy, and I'm very grateful to have been included.
And I'm at alicia-j.com, and echoing the gratitude. Really powerful.
Excellent. And I am at Michelle_Hart. Thank you all so much for being on this panel, for sharing wisdom, for sharing pieces of yourself, for being vulnerable and honest and direct. And hopefully folks listening were able to take a little bit, a whole lot of it with you. And we will see you in the streets, right? We're still fighting for bodily autonomy. So we'll still see you out there. I am going to pass it back to Karishi Wigginton, who's going to let you know what is next in this conference, this lovely conference that we are in. Thank you all so much for being in conversation together.
Woo, woo, woo. Oh my goodness, y'all. Thank you so much for that panel. That was life-giving. I was watching it for most of the time on the other end with folks. And it just, all the comments were just so powerful. You was giving folks medicine, you was helping them get their whole lives together. So it was really powerful. I think I'm live. Am I live? So I promised y'all a hot panel. I hope that, am I good? All right, thank you. I promised y'all a hot panel. I knew it was gonna be fresh. Even in my wildest dreams, though, I didn't know when they started talking about family business. I said, "Oh man, we're going there." And it was so necessary, so many layers to the conversation. And here's the thing about liberation, and here's the thing about freedom that I know. You know how Oprah says, "What I know for sure." What I know for sure is that if we are not able to be honest, we are not able to be free, period. Right. And so it was so necessary that all that family business started to come out. So now what we have are two simultaneous panels. So y'all can either choose from it's going to be a fire environmental justice panel. And we talking about cannabis justice. We talking about food justice, land justice, all these different things under the umbrella of environmental justice. And then at the same time, we have a panel on reentry, liberation, and restorative justice, right? So you heard them talk about abolition earlier. And so what does it mean when we're talking about abolition and then taking on a framework where we want to center formerly incarcerated folks? What does it actually mean to live that as a practice in our lives and in our organizations? And so we're going to be able to have another fire panel happening. And then also to talk about like the ways that the carceral state is also based on punishment, right? And it shows up even in how we are treated in the workplace or at schools, and not just when we get to prison, right? So you have either one of those panels that you can choose from, or you can bounce around, which is what I probably will do, right? So take a few minutes. I think we have like a 5-minute break, and then you'll be able to jump into one of those panels. Thanks, everybody.